back home in Wales, one sees sometimes on these old chapels that dot the countryside biblical names, and one would be Soar, which we find in this first reading, refuge. When we come into the house of God, we come into a safe place. We come into a land which does not belong to our own geography. It is claimed by heaven. It is extraterritorial. And in it the angels have their home. Where the Blessed Sacrament is, there is a great throng. And so, as in the case of Moses, we take off our shoes, that is, what we have brought with us, including any noisiness that might be in our heart. For we, as in the case of the Gospel, are in turbulence. You may have been aware of this expression from having to fly in turbulent skies. We are asked to put on our safety belts and not to circulate in the corridors of the aircraft. But turbulence happens also in the soul. And if we come into the house of God in turbulent mode, the Lord can't address us the word. We are blocking him out. And it takes a while to go into stillness. I remember years ago going, possibly the first time, to Medjugorje. It was way back in the 90s. And we had quite a few celebrations that week which were somewhat American in style and not always perhaps what would have been pleasing to heaven with regard to the content of the homily. One can play to the gallery and draw laughter and applause, but sometimes it is at the expense of the grace of God and the blessing that he wants to give us. And then one day we had a very different celebration, and the accent that day was not actually American, because the celebrant was a fairly youngish English priest, and none of that came into it. And I remember to this day his teaching, and it was teaching. It was this. He insisted that there is no bonding between the Creator and the creature until the creature comes into still mode. It just can't happen. And he explained that that involved also work, preparing the ground for stillness. And it started, he explained, with the body itself. I remember actually being edified in Rome, because I was living with quite a few Indians, and in chapel they could do it instinctively. They sat in upright mode for long periods in physical and spiritual stillness, receptive. Well, this good priest went on to explain the importance, therefore, of creating stillness in our life. Otherwise, we'll be on the outside of our being until we die. Superficial beings. So, we went away edified. But it didn't stop there. I happened to pick this up. One of our group had observed something strange while he was preaching. All around him, out of nowhere, came a strange blue light all the time that he was preaching. And she was about to go up to him to say so at the end of the celebration. And she was taken aback because just as she was approaching him, someone else was doing just the same thing and saying the very same thing as she was about to say. So it was confirmation that it was objective. And discussing this amongst ourselves, we said, maybe that was a hint that is what the Lord wants in preaching. With regard to preaching, it has to have content. I am sure that over the Catholic globe today, if preaching goes on the reading that we have heard, a lot of it will be toned down. It is very contemporary, and it is not politically correct to mention the word Sodom when attaching to it the word sodomy. By now we have stepped back, and the vast majority, it seems, would have this reaction: "Oh, come off it. It's about time the Lord grew up. Doesn't he know that it's all acceptable?" And so it is that we're not allowed, even in church, to say that actually it's not. There are two problems. One is, as it were, the privileged state that a certain category of persons seems to claim and have claimed for them by other people. That a certain type of person is allowed to sin in certain areas, whereas others are not. There is also another problem. It's this. It is the claim that God creates certain people in a certain way, that they are not to marry in the normal way, but that they are to have another road unto glory, unto glory. Just to get this clear, if one holds before young people certain alternatives, certain normal possibilities, then they will investigate, experiment, and possibly get switched on to something which they needn't to have. And therefore they can be brought into a mentality that they are such and have to be such. It's rather a tragedy, actually, that by now a fairly high proportion of humanity is going to find it very hard to settle down to a normal marriage. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there, because extending this to the whole of life, it has become normal to, as it were, use the field of the sacred reproduction of life in such a way that it's divorced from its ends. And that is a fundamental problem, seen quite clearly by St. Paul VI, and who, by the way, held out with tenacity against the advice of some of those who were trying to counsel him, even on high, because he saw that at risk was the very notion of our humanity in this field, that certain things are divinely ordered and ordained, and they, by their very nature, place God and man in close collaboration, and therefore not in independence one of the other. And therefore there is an order in things, and that extends right down the line of anything concerned with that field of activity. If we start in a domain which is not going to go to what it's meant to, it's out of order. So all this is out of order, and we cannot encourage it. We who hear confessions know that actually those who do that, on every level I mean, are not at peace. They try to be because they're told they can be, but they're not. There's something niggling inside which says, actually, I'm not deeply happy. It's very sad when actually one finds that somebody brought to that point comes to confession and is not willing to make this other step of getting out of a repeated situation. There, the choice is back in the penitent's court. You can't have your cake and eat it. So this is the kind of teaching that people need. And nowhere, hardly, is this ever attacked in the pulpits of this land. What is given is the accepted norm, pumped at us by the media, nourished by Lucifer, who will do anything to get an immortal soul. And the easiest one has ever been precisely the realm of our genitality. Old Nick has been around a long time, and he knows exactly how to get souls into his kingdom. Where angels live, yes, but fallen ones, and bad company is there. Bad noise and bad sounds, bad language of rebellion and refusal. And do you know that also everything that happens down there is exactly corresponding to what happened up here? Every sin has exactly the corresponding pain. As in glory, every sacrifice has exactly the corresponding ecstasy, as it were, extra. The faculties sacrificed are rewarded in heaven. Virginity, therefore, is glorified in the place where it matters. What is glorified here, alas, ends here and has atrocious consequences if abused.